The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Rawhide, Nevada, and Clara Jameson stepped down into the August heat with a baby on her hip, a 5-year-old girl clutching her skirt, and a 7-year-old boy trailing behind with their single worn carpet bag. Dust swirled around her boots as she surveyed the ramshackle collection of buildings that made up the silver mining town, her heart sinking with each passing second as reality crashed over her like a cold wave. She had exactly $3.40 to her name, 3 hungry children, and no husband waiting for her anywhere in this God-forsaken corner of Nevada. The telegram she had received 4 months ago had been brief and devastating. Thomas Jameson, her husband of 8 years, had been killed in a mining accident outside Virginia City. By the time the news reached her in Missouri, he had already been buried in an unmarked grave, his meager possessions sold to cover the cost. The mining company had sent her nothing, claimed he owed them more than he had earned. Clara had spent every penny she possessed getting the 4 of them here, chasing the foolish hope that Thomas had left something behind, some friend or acquaintance who might help them. But standing in the merciless afternoon sun with 3 pairs of eyes looking up at her expectantly, she realized how monumentally stupid that hope had been. "Mama, I am thirsty," her daughter Emma said, tugging on her faded blue dress. "I know, sweetheart. We will get you some water in just a moment." Clara shifted baby Michael on her hip and tried to ignore the gnawing anxiety in her stomach. Her son Daniel stood beside her, his young face already trying to look brave and strong like he thought a man should be. She was 26 years old, widowed, nearly penniless, and stranded in a rough mining town with 3 children under 8. She had no skills beyond cooking and sewing, and even if she could find work, who would watch her babies while she labored? Clara straightened her shoulders and walked toward the general store. She would ask about boarding houses, about work, about anything that might keep her children fed for another day. Then she would figure out tomorrow. The interior of the store was dim and blessedly cooler than the street. A portly man with spectacles stood behind the counter, and he looked up as she entered. His eyes traveled over her worn dress, her children, and the single bag, and she saw his expression shift from curious to wary. "Good afternoon," Clara said, forcing brightness into her voice. "I am looking for information about lodging and perhaps employment opportunities in town." The storekeeper scratched his chin. "Lodging is scarce. We got 1 boarding house, but Mrs. Fletcher does not take children. Too much noise and trouble, she says." "As for work, well, what kind of work were you thinking?" Clara felt her stomach drop but kept her smile fixed. "I can cook, clean, sew. I am a hard worker and quick to learn." "The saloon might need another girl," he said, and something in his tone made her skin crawl. "I meant respectable work," Clara said firmly. He shrugged. "Not much call for that here. Most of the miners do their own cooking or eat at the saloon. Laundry is done by the Chinese fellows down by the creek. You got a husband here in town. I am a widow. My husband died in the mines." The storekeeper's expression softened slightly. "That is hard luck, missus. Real hard luck. But I cannot help you much. This is a rough town and a woman alone with children." He shook his head. "You might try the church. Pastor Williams sometimes knows of families needing help." Clara thanked him and bought a penny's worth of hard candy to split between the children, watching her precious funds dwindle even further. Back outside, Emma and Daniel sucked on their candy while she asked a passing woman for directions to the church. The church was a small wooden structure at the edge of town, white paint peeling in the harsh sun. Clara found Pastor Williams inside, a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She explained her situation while the children sat quietly in a pew, exhaustion finally overtaking them. Pastor Williams listened with a furrowed brow, his hands clasped in front of him. "Mrs. Jameson, I wish I had better news for you. Times are hard here, and most families are struggling themselves. The mining boom brought a lot of single men but few women and even fewer families. I do not know of anyone looking to hire help right now, especially someone who would need to bring children along." Clara felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Is there nowhere we can stay, even temporarily? I will work for room and board, anything." The pastor was quiet for a long moment. "There is an old cabin about a mile outside town. It belonged to a prospector who died last winter. It is not much, just one room and in poor repair, but no one has claimed it. You could stay there if you can make it habitable. It would at least be a roof over your heads." It was better than nothing. Clara accepted gratefully, and the pastor gave her directions along with a basket of food from the church stores. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, she gathered her children and started the walk out of town. The cabin was worse than she had imagined. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, half the roof was missing shingles, and the interior was thick with dust and debris. But it had 4 walls and a stone fireplace, and after months of uncertainty, even this felt like something solid. Clara spent the last hours of daylight sweeping out the worst of the dirt and making a nest of blankets in the corner farthest from the holes in the roof. The children ate bread and cheese from the pastor's basket, and she sang them to sleep with lullabies from her own childhood, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fear she could not let them see. When they were finally asleep, Clara sat in the doorway and looked out at the darkening desert. The stars were beginning to emerge, more stars than she had ever seen in Missouri, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry, silent tears streaming down her face, and then she wiped her eyes and began to plan. Tomorrow she would go back to town and knock on every door until someone gave her work. She would clean stables if she had to, anything honest that would feed her babies. Thomas was gone, and grief was a luxury she could not afford. Her children needed her to be strong. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn to Michael's hungry cries. She nursed him while Daniel and Emma still slept, then carefully extracted herself and stepped outside to assess their situation in full daylight. The cabin sat in a small hollow, sheltered by rocky outcroppings and scrubby desert vegetation. A dry creek bed ran about 100 yards away, and in the distance, she could see the smudge of smoke from Rawhide's chimneys. She had just started planning her trip back to town when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Clara's heart jumped into her throat as a rider came around the outcropping, sitting tall in the saddle on a rangy bay horse. He was a cowboy by the look of him, wearing dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat pulled low against the rising sun. He reined in his horse when he spotted her, and for a moment they simply stared at each other across the scrubby yard. Then he touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, madam. Did not know anyone was living out here." Clara lifted her chin. "We arrived yesterday. Pastor Williams said the cabin was unclaimed." The cowboy swung down from his horse with an easy grace. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. When he pushed his hat back, she saw gray-blue eyes that were direct but not unkind. "That is right enough. Old Clem did not have any family to speak of." He glanced at the cabin and then back at her. "You planning to live here? For now, until I can find work and save enough for something better." He nodded slowly, taking in details she knew must paint a clear picture. Her dress was clean but patched in several places. She had no firewood stacked, no horse or wagon, no supplies beyond what she could carry. She was alone. "Yates Grayson," he said finally. "I work at the Triple Bar Ranch about 5 miles west of here. We run cattle and horses. I was cutting across to town when I saw smoke from your fire." "Clara Jameson." She hesitated, then added, "I am a widow. I have 3 children." Something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite read it. "That is hard, Mrs. This country is not easy for anyone, but especially not for a woman alone with youngsters." Before Clara could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama!" "It is all right, sweetheart. This is Mr. Grayson. He works at a ranch nearby." Emma studied the cowboy with solemn blue eyes while Daniel emerged behind her, instinctively protective as he moved to his mother's side. Yates Grayson looked at the children for a long moment, and Clara saw something cross his face that might have been sadness or memory. "How old are they?" he asked quietly. "Daniel is 7, Emma is 5, and the baby is 9 months. Yates was silent for another moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. "Mrs. Jameson, that cabin is not fit for a family. Half the roof is gone, there is no proper door, and come winter you will freeze." "Do you have supplies? Food? Water?" Clara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "We have enough for now. I plan to find work in town." "Doing what?" "There is not much call for women's work in a mining camp, and nothing you could bring children to." His tone was blunt but not cruel, simply stating facts she already knew. "I will find something. I have to." Yates looked at the cabin again, at the children, and finally back at Clara. When he spoke, his voice was measured and calm. "The Triple Bar is owned by my cousin and his wife. They have a ranch house that is too big for just the 2 of them now that their children are grown and gone. They have been talking about needing help with the household work, the cooking and cleaning and such. The bunkhouse feeds about 8 hands, and that is getting to be too much for Mrs. Grayson to manage alone." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "Are you saying they might hire me?" "I am saying I could ride back and ask them. If they agree, you would have a place to live, food for your children, and wages. It would not be fancy, but it would be safe and steady." It sounded too good to be true, and Clara had learned long ago that things that sounded too good usually were. "Why would you do this? You do not know me." Yates met her eyes steadily. "Because I know what it is like to have nowhere to go, and because those children deserve a chance." He paused, then added, "I will make no promises, but let me talk to my cousin. Can you wait here for a few hours?" Clara wanted to weep with relief and hope and terror all mixed together. Instead, she simply nodded. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Grayson. Thank you." He mounted his horse with that same easy grace and turned back toward the west. "I will be back before noon one way or another." Clara watched him ride away until he disappeared into the heat shimmer, then gathered her children close. "Come inside, my loves. Let us tidy up while we wait." The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara did what she could to make the cabin more presentable, though there was only so much that could be done. She washed the children's faces and hands with precious water from the canteen, combed Emma's tangled hair, and tried not to let herself hope too hard. When she heard hoofbeats again, the sun was nearly overhead. Clara hurried to the door and saw not one rider but 2. Yates Grayson was accompanied by a woman in her early 50s, round-faced and sturdy, sitting side-saddle on a gray mare. The woman dismounted before Yates could help her, moving with the confidence of someone who had been riding horses all her life. She walked straight to Clara and held out her hand. "Louisa Grayson, Yates tells me you are looking for work." Clara shook her hand, trying not to let her desperation show. "Yes, madam. I can cook, clean, sew, and manage a household. I worked hard on my husband's farm in Missouri before he came west. I am reliable and I learn quickly." Louisa looked her up and down with sharp eyes, then glanced at the children who had emerged to cluster around their mother. 3 little ones. That is a lot of extra mouths. They are well behaved and will not be a burden. Daniel can help with chores and Emma is learning. The baby is still nursing, so he will not need extra food. What happened to your husband? Mining accident 4 months ago. He died before I could reach him. Clara kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. Louisa nodded slowly, her expression softening slightly. This is hard country for women alone. My own mother was widowed out here when I was young, so I know something about it. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Here is what I can offer. You would live in the small house beside the main ranch building. It used to be the foreman's quarters, but our current foreman lives in town with his wife. 2 rooms, a stove, a real floor and roof. You would cook for the household and the hands, keep the main house clean, help with laundry and mending. In exchange, you get the house, food for you and the children, and $15 a month wages. Sundays are yours unless we have an emergency." Clara could barely breathe. It was more than she had dared hope for. "I accept. Thank you, Mrs. Grayson. You will not regret it. Call me Louisa. If we are going to be living close, we might as well be friendly about it. Can you ride?" "Not well, but I can sit a horse if needed." Louisa looked at Yates. "Go back and get the wagon. We will bring them all out today. No sense leaving them in this wreck another night." Yates nodded and rode off again while Louisa settled herself on the cabin's rickety step and began asking Clara practical questions about cooking for large groups and managing supplies. Clara answered as best she could, relief and gratitude making her almost giddy. By mid-afternoon, they were loaded into a wagon driven by Yates, their few possessions tucked in the back with the children. Clara sat on the bench beside him, holding Michael in her lap, while Emma and Daniel perched on their carpetbag in the wagon bed, eyes wide with excitement. The Triple Bar Ranch spread across a valley between low hills, with a creek running through it that actually had water. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch and real glass windows. Nearby stood a barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse, and the small house Louisa had mentioned. It was tiny compared to the main building, just 2 rooms with a connecting door, but to Clara it looked like a palace. The walls were solid, the roof was intact, and there was a real iron stove in the main room. The back room had a bed frame and a window that looked out toward the creek. "It is not much," Louisa said, watching Clara's face, "but it is sound and weathertight." "It is wonderful," Clara said honestly. "More than I hoped for." Over the next several hours, Louisa showed Clara around the ranch, introducing her to the rhythms and requirements of her new work. The hands ate breakfast at dawn and supper at dusk, with a midday meal packed for them to take into the range. The main house needed daily tidying and a thorough cleaning once a week. Laundry was done on Mondays in the big tubs behind the bunkhouse. "I will help you get your feet under you this first week," Louisa said. "After that, you will manage it on your own. My husband Henry and I will mostly stay out of your way, but he likes his coffee strong and his eggs over easy." That evening, Clara cooked her first meal at the Triple Bar. She made beef stew, biscuits, and apple cobbler from the generous stores in the ranch larder, working with ingredients she had not seen in months. When the hands filed in from their work, they were dusty and tired, ranging in age from a grizzled old-timer to boys barely out of childhood. They were also clearly surprised to see a woman and 3 children in the dining room. "Everyone, this is Mrs. Jameson," Louisa announced. "She will be cooking and keeping house for us now. You will treat her and her children with respect, or you will answer to me and Henry both. Understood?" There was a chorus of "yes, madam," and polite nods in Clara's direction. She served the food while trying not to feel self-conscious under all those eyes. The men ate with enthusiasm, and several complimented the cobbler before heading back to the bunkhouse. Yates was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at Clara. "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Jameson. It was real good." "Thank you, Mr. Grayson, for everything. I do not know what we would have done if you had not happened by this morning." He shrugged slightly. "Just doing what is right. Sleep well." After everyone had gone, Clara got her children settled in their new home. The bed frame was big enough for all four of them if they squeezed together, and she had been given quilts and pillows from the main house. Emma and Daniel were asleep, almost before their heads touched the pillows, exhausted from the day's upheaval. Clara lay awake in the darkness with Michael tucked against her side, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the windmill, the murmur of voices from the bunkhouse. For the first time in 4 months, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. They had a home. They had food. She had work that was honest and hard but manageable. Her children would be safe. She whispered a prayer of gratitude into the darkness and finally let herself sleep. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was exhausting but satisfying. Clara woke before dawn to start breakfast, cooking huge quantities of eggs, bacon, potatoes, and biscuits for hungry men who worked hard physical labor all day. She packed midday meals while cleaning up from breakfast, then spent the middle hours tidying the main house, doing laundry and mending. Afternoons meant preparing supper, and evenings were for her children. Daniel helped where he could, carrying water and gathering eggs from the chicken coop. Emma entertained Michael and tried to be useful in her 5-year-old way. The children thrived on regular meals and the security of routine. Louisa proved to be fair but exacting, showing Clara exactly how she wanted things done and expecting those standards to be met. But she was also generous with praise when it was earned, and she had a soft spot for the children. Henry Grayson, a weathered man in his late 50s with Yates's same gray-blue eyes, was quiet but kind, slipping pennies to Daniel and Emma when he thought no one was looking. Clara saw Yates every day at meals. He was unfailingly polite, always thanking her for the food and asking after the children. But he kept his distance, never lingering to talk or seeking her out. Clara told herself she was glad of it. She needed to focus on her work and her family, not on the quiet cowboy with the steady eyes. But she noticed things anyway. The way he was gentle with his horse and patient with the younger hands who were still learning. The way his face lit up when he smiled, which was not often but always genuine when it happened. The way he sometimes looked at her children with something wistful in his expression. One evening about a month after her arrival, Clara was washing dishes when she heard shouting from outside. She dried her hands and went to the door just as Yates came walking up leading his horse, which was limping badly. "What happened?" Clara called. "Stepped in a gopher hole out on the range. I think it is just a bad bruise, but I need to check her over properly." He was dusty and clearly tired, his shirt stained with sweat from the long ride back. "Have you eaten? I kept some supper warm." Yates glanced at the main house, then back at her. "I do not want to trouble you." "It is no trouble. I made extra. Sit on the porch and I will bring you a plate." She did not give him a chance to argue, just went back inside and filled a plate with roast chicken, potatoes, and greens. When she brought it out, he was sitting on the edge of the porch, his hat set aside and his hair damp where he had splashed water on his face from the pump. "You do not have to wait on me like this," he said as she handed him the plate. "I know you are already working from dawn to dark. So are you, and you helped me when I had nothing. The least I can do is make sure you do not go to bed hungry." Clara meant to go back inside, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the warm evening air, or the way the last light was painting the hills gold, or simply the fact that she had not had an adult conversation in days. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Yates looked up from his food. "Of course. Why did you help me that day? You could have just ridden on. Most men would have." He was quiet for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully. Finally, he said, "My mother was widowed when I was 8. My father died in the war, and she was left with 4 children and a failing farm in Texas. She tried to hold it together, but everything went wrong. Crops failed, animals died, debts piled up. We lost the farm when I was 10. What happened to you?" "We moved from place to place for a couple years. Ma took any work she could find, but it was never enough. She got sick the winter I turned 12. Pneumonia. She died within a week." His voice was even, but Clara could hear the old pain underneath. "The church split us up. My older brother went to one family, my sisters to another. I was big enough to work, so I hired on as a stable hand and sent what money I could to help with the girls." Clara's throat tightened. "I am so sorry." Yates shrugged. "It was a long time ago. But when I saw you standing outside that cabin with your children, I saw my mother. And I thought about how maybe things could have been different for us if someone had given her a real chance instead of charity or pity. So I asked. You gave us more than a chance. You gave us a life." He looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Louisa and Henry did that. I just made the introduction. You did more than that, and you know it." Clara sat down on the porch step, a few feet away from him. "Your mother would be proud of the man you became." "Maybe, I hope so." He set his empty plate aside. "Your children seem to be settling in well. Daniel asked me about the horses yesterday." Clara smiled. "He is fascinated by them. He follows the hands around whenever I let him, asking a million questions. He can come out to the barn sometime if you do not mind. I can show him how to brush the horses, teach him a bit about their care. Nothing dangerous, just the basics. He would love that. Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sky fade from gold to purple. Clara knew she should go back inside, but the peace of the moment held her still. "Can I ask you something now?" Yates said. "Of course. Do you ever think about going back? To Missouri, I mean. You must have family there, people who knew you before." Clara shook her head. "My parents died years ago. Thomas had a brother, but we were never close. And even if there was family to go back to, I could not afford the journey. Everything I have is here now. That does not seem like much to hold on to. It is more than I had a month ago, and sometimes that is enough." She stood and picked up his plate. "I should get the children to bed. Thank you for talking with me, Yates." He stood as well, reaching for his hat. "Thank you for the supper, Clara. It was the best meal I have had in a long time." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about it made her pulse quicken. She told herself she was being foolish and went back inside. But that evening marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Yates began stopping by more often in the evenings, sometimes to talk to Daniel about horses, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk with Clara while she mended or snapped beans. He had a quiet sense of humor that caught her by surprise, and he was surprisingly well-read for a cowboy, having spent his lonely adolescence working his way through whatever books he could borrow. Clara found herself looking forward to those conversations, to the sound of his voice and the way he really listened when she talked. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something beyond just a mother or a worker. Louisa noticed, of course. One afternoon in late September, she caught Clara smiling to herself while kneading bread dough and raised an eyebrow. "Yates has been spending a lot of time at your place lately." Clara felt her cheeks heat. "He has been teaching Daniel about the horses. And Emma likes him too. He carved her a little wooden horse last week." "Uh-huh, and what about you? Do you like him?" "I respect him. He is a good man." "That is not what I asked." Lewis's voice was knowing but not unkind. "Clara, you have been here 3 months and you work harder than anyone I have ever employed. But you are also 26 years old and alive. You are allowed to notice when a man is kind and decent and clearly interested in you. Even if I did notice, which I am not saying I do, it would not matter. I have 3 children and barely enough money to my name to fill a thimble. What man would want to take that on? You might be surprised." Louisa shaped her own loaf and set it aside to rise. "Yates has never brought a woman around before, never showed much interest in courting. I always figured he was too busy working to save money for his own place. But lately, he is different. Happier, maybe, more settled." Clara did not know what to say to that, so she focused on her bread and tried not to let hope take root in her chest. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable. That evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing the first real cold of autumn. Clara got the children inside early and built up the fire in the stove, grateful for the solid walls around them. Rain began to patter against the roof, then pour in earnest, accompanied by rumbles of thunder. She was reading to Emma and Daniel by lamplight when someone knocked on the door. Clara opened it to find Yates standing in the rain, water streaming off his hat. "Sorry to bother you, but we are moving the horses into the barn. This storm is going to be bad, and I wanted to make sure you had everything you need. Your roof is solid, but sometimes the wind can get under the shingles. We are fine. Thank you for checking." A gust of wind drove rain against the house hard enough to make the walls shudder. Yates glanced up at the roof, frowning. "I am going to check your woodpile. You might need more if this lasts all night." Before Clara could respond, he was gone into the rain. She could hear him moving around outside, and a few minutes later he knocked again. This time, when she opened the door, he was carrying an armload of split wood. "Where do you want this?" Clara pointed to the box beside the stove. Yates brought in 3 more loads, stacking them carefully, his clothes soaked through. When he was done, he stood dripping on her floor, and Clara suddenly realized how cold he must be. "Wait here." She went to the back room and returned with one of the quilts Louisa had given her. "At least dry off before you go back out." Yates took the quilt and rubbed it over his face and hair, then hesitated. "I should get back to the barn. The younger hands will need help settling the animals." As if in answer, a crack of lightning split the sky so bright it lit up the room, followed immediately by thunder that shook the whole house. Emma squeaked in fear and Daniel tried to look brave but moved closer to his mother. "It is all right," Clara said, hugging them both. "It is just noise." But the storm was clearly worsening. Rain was coming down in sheets now, and the wind howled around the corners of the house. Yates looked out the window and shook his head. "I do not like this. These autumn storms can be fierce. Do you have a cellar?" "No, just the house." Another boom of thunder, and this time Michael started crying. Clara picked him up and rocked him, trying to soothe his fright. Yates watched them for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "I am going to stay here until this passes, just to make sure nothing happens to the roof or the stove." "Is that all right with you?" Clara knew it was probably improper, but the idea of being alone in the storm with 3 frightened children was more daunting than any concern about appearances. "Yes, thank you." Yates positioned himself by the door where he could keep an eye on things. Clara got the children settled back down, continuing the story she had been reading even though she had to raise her voice to be heard over the storm. Gradually, they calmed, Emma leaning against her side and Daniel fighting to keep his eyes open. "Tell us about the horses, Mr. Grayson," Emma said suddenly. "Tell us about your favorite one." Yates looked surprised but smiled. "My favorite horse is the one I was riding today, the bay mare that went lame. Her name is Copper, and I have had her for 5 years. I bought her as a yearling with the first money I saved after coming to work here." "Does she do tricks?" Daniel asked, interested despite his tiredness. "Not tricks exactly, but she is smart. She can cut a cow out of a herd almost by herself, barely needs me to tell her what to do. And she is gentle. When I was training her, she never once tried to buck me off, even when she had every right to." "Will her leg get better?" Emma's voice was worried. "I think so. She just needs rest. Sometimes the best thing you can do for an injury is give it time to heal." He said it simply, but his eyes met Clara's over the children's heads, and she had the feeling he was talking about more than just a horse's leg. The storm raged for another hour before finally beginning to ease. By then, both Daniel and Emma had fallen asleep on the bed frame, exhausted by the excitement and fear. Clara covered them carefully and moved Michael to his cradle, then returned to the main room. Yates was still by the door, watching the rain through the window. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot on the stove and brought one to him. "You must be freezing in those wet clothes. I am sorry I do not have anything that would fit you. I will dry out. The house is warm." He accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the cup. "Your children are good kids, Clara. You have done well with them, especially given everything you have been through. They are my world. Everything I do is for them. I know, I can see it." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I first saw you that morning outside Clem's cabin, I thought you were going to fail. I am sorry to say it so bluntly, but it is true. I looked at you and those 3 little ones and thought there was no way you would make it. The West is too hard, especially for a woman alone." Clara bristled slightly. "Yet here I am." "Yes, here you are, and you have not just survived, you have thrived. You work harder than anyone I know, you never complain, and your children are happy and healthy. You proved me wrong, and I am glad of it. Why are you telling me this?" Yates set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. The lamplight threw shadows across his face, making him look older and more serious. "Because I want you to know that I see your strength. I admire it. And I want you to know that you do not have to do everything alone anymore. You have people here who care about you, who want to help." Clara's heart was beating too fast. "People. Me. I care about you, Clara. About you and Daniel and Emma and Michael. I know it is probably too soon, and I know you have no reason to trust any man after what life has thrown at you. But I need you to know how I feel." She stared at him, torn between hope and fear. "Yates, I have 3 children. I am poor. I have nothing to offer anyone. You have yourself. That is more than enough." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked with his body every day. "I am not asking you for anything right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand, so you can think about it if you want to." Clara looked down at their joined hands. She had been alone for so long, carrying everything by herself. The weight of it had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. But standing here with Yates, feeling the warmth and strength of his hand in hers, she realized how tired she was of being strong all the time. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything yet, just think about it." He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "The storm is passing. I should get back to the barn and check on the animals." He was gone before Clara could find words, disappearing into the drizzle that was all that remained of the fierce storm. She stood in the doorway and watched him go, her hand still tingling where he had held it. That night, she lay awake long after the children were asleep, staring at the ceiling and turning his words over in her mind. She had cared for Thomas, had built a life with him and borne his children. But their marriage had been practical, a joining of 2 people who needed each other for survival. She had never felt this flutter in her chest, this warmth that spread through her when Yates smiled. Was this what falling in love felt like? And if it was, what was she supposed to do about it? The next morning, Clara threw herself into her work with extra vigor, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Yates was at breakfast with the other hands, but he caught her eye and gave her a small smile that made her pulse quicken. Louisa definitely noticed. She cornered Clara in the kitchen after the men had left. "All right, what happened? You are glowing like a lantern and you have been staring at nothing all morning." "Nothing happened. Yates stayed through the storm last night to make sure we were safe, that is all." "Uh-huh. And?" Clara tried to hold it in, but she was bursting to talk to someone. "And he said he cares about me, about all of us." Louis's face broke into a wide grin. "Well, it is about time. I was wondering how long it would take him to work up the courage, but I do not know what to do. It has only been months since Thomas died. People will talk if I start courting someone already. People always talk. The question is whether you care about what they say more than you care about being happy." Louisa started scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. "Clara, you are young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Thomas is gone, and I am sure you cared for him, but you do not owe him a lifetime of mourning. You owe your children a mother who is whole and happy, and you owe yourself a chance at love." "But 3 children, Louisa. What man really wants to take on 3 children that are not his own? A good man. The right man." Louisa set down the pot and looked at her seriously. "Yates has been here for 6 years. In that time, I have seen at least a dozen young women try to catch his eye. Some of them were pretty, some were rich, some had family connections. He was polite to all of them and interested in none. Then you show up with 3 babies and nothing but the clothes on your back, and suddenly he cannot stay away. That should tell you something." It did tell Clara something, but she was still afraid to believe it. Afraid to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have something good after so much loss and struggle. Over the next weeks, Yates made his intentions clear in small but steady ways. He carved toys for the children, not just once but regularly. A top for Daniel, a doll for Emma, a teething ring for Michael. He fixed the squeaky board on Clara's porch steps without being asked. He started joining them for supper a few nights a week, and Clara noticed he always brought something with him. Fresh rabbit he had trapped, or wildflowers picked from the hills, or a book he thought she might enjoy. He was courting her, Clara realized. Quietly, respectfully, giving her time and space but making his interest unmistakable. And she was falling for him. She could not help it. He was kind and steady and made her laugh. He was good with her children, treating them with patience and genuine affection. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before, like she was not just a mother or a housekeeper but a woman worthy of attention and care. One Sunday in early October, Yates asked if she and the children would like to go on a picnic by the creek. It was her day off, and the weather was perfect, that crystalline autumn clarity that made everything sharp and bright. Clara packed a basket with cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple pie. Yates brought a blanket and his patience as Daniel and Emma raced ahead, exploring every rock and bush along the path. They found a spot in the shade of a cottonwood tree, the creek burbling beside them, and spread out the blanket. The children ate quickly and then went to play in the shallow water under Clara's watchful eye. Yates stretched out on the blanket, propped up on one elbow, and watched them with a slight smile. "Emma has your eyes," he said. "Same blue, same expression when she is thinking hard about something. And Daniel has his father's stubborn chin. Thomas could be quite determined when he set his mind to something." "Is it hard, talking about him, I mean?" Clara considered the question. "Not as hard as it used to be. I loved him in my way, but we were young when we married, and we were still learning each other when he left for Nevada. Sometimes I wonder what we might have become if he had lived. But I cannot change what happened, and dwelling on it does not help anyone. That is a wise way to look at it. Not wise, just practical. I learned a long time ago that you cannot carry more than you can lift, and grief is the heaviest thing there is. You have to set it down sometimes, or it will crush you. Yates reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. You do not have to carry things alone anymore, Clara. I meant what I said during the storm. I am here, and I am not going anywhere. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. His gray-blue eyes were serious and warm, and there was no doubt in his expression, no hesitation. He meant every word. I am falling in love with you, she said quietly. I did not mean to. I told myself I could not afford to, but it is happening anyway. Yates's whole face lit up with a smile that transformed him from quietly handsome to genuinely beautiful. Good. Because I fell in love with you the moment you straightened your shoulders outside that cabin and told me you would find a way. I have been gone ever since. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back, and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. Clara's eyes closed and she let herself feel it, the warmth and tenderness and hope all wrapped together in the touch of his lips on hers. When they pulled apart, Emma was standing at the edge of the blanket, dripping wet and staring at them with wide eyes. "Mama, are you kissing Mr. Grayson?" Clara felt her face flame, but Yates just laughed. "Yes, she is. Is that all right with you?" Emma considered this gravely. "Does that mean he is going to be our papa now?" Clara opened her mouth, not sure how to answer that, but Yates spoke first. "Would you like that, if I was your papa? Will you live with us and teach me to ride horses? If your mama says yes, then yes to both those things." Emma's face broke into a grin. "Then I say yes." She ran back to the creek to tell Daniel, who looked over at them with a more skeptical expression. He was old enough to remember his father, and Clara knew this would be harder for him. "We should talk to him," she said quietly. "He is not going to accept this as easily as Emma. I know, and we will take whatever time he needs. I am not trying to replace his father, Clara. I just want to be part of your family." That evening, after the children were in bed, Clara and Yates sat on her porch and talked seriously about the future, about what it would mean for them to marry, how they would handle Daniel's grief and confusion, what kind of life they could build together. "I have been saving money for 6 years," Yates told her. "I have enough to buy a small spread of my own, nothing fancy but good grazing land with water. I have been waiting until I could afford to build a proper house before I did it. With you working and saving too, we could do it sooner. You want your own ranch, I want a home, a place that is ours, somewhere Daniel and Emma can grow up, and where Michael will not remember ever living anywhere else. Somewhere we can build something together." He took her hand. "I am not rich, Clara. I cannot promise you luxury or ease. But I can promise you I will work hard every day to provide for you and the children. I can promise I will be faithful and honest. And I can promise I will love you for the rest of my life." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "That is more than I ever thought I would have, more than I ever dreamed of." "Is that a yes?" "Yes. I will marry you, Yates Grayson." He kissed her again, longer and deeper this time, and Clara felt the last walls around her heart crumble. She had been protecting herself for so long, keeping everyone at arm's length because she could not afford to be vulnerable. But Yates had slipped past her defenses without her even noticing. And now here she was, in love and terrified and hopeful all at once. They were married in late October, a simple ceremony at the church in Rawhide with Louisa and Henry as witnesses. Daniel stood beside Clara with a serious expression, holding Michael, while Emma clutched a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Pastor Williams said the words, and Yates slipped a plain gold band on Clara's finger. "I take all 4 of you," he had told her the night before. "That is my vow." You and Daniel and Emma and Michael. You are all mine now, and I am yours." There was no money for a honeymoon, but Louisa and Henry gave them 3 days to themselves. They stayed at the little house on the Triple Bar property, and Yates spent those days getting to know the children properly. He took Daniel riding, letting the boy sit in front of him on Copper's back and feel what it was like to be up that high. He played dolls with Emma, his big hands clumsy but patient as he helped dress and undress the wooden figure he had carved. He walked the floor with Michael when the baby fussed, singing old cowboy songs in a surprisingly good baritone. And at night, after the children were asleep, he and Clara learned each other. He was gentle and careful, patient with her nervousness after so many months alone. She had forgotten what it was like to be touched with tenderness, to be wanted not just for what she could provide but for herself. "I love you," Yates murmured into her hair as they lay tangled together in the darkness. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. I did not think I could feel this way again. I did not think I deserved to. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Yates moved his few possessions into Clara's house, and suddenly the small space felt like a real home. He was there for breakfast and supper, and his presence changed the whole dynamic of the household. The children bloomed under his attention, even Daniel, who gradually began to unbend and accept this new man in their lives. One evening about a month after the wedding, Daniel came to Clara while she was washing dishes. "Mama, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Is it bad if I call Yates Papa? I still remember my real papa, but Yates is here and he is nice to us. Is it wrong?" Clara's throat tightened. She dried her hands and knelt down to her son's level. "It is not wrong at all, Daniel. Your real papa loved you very much, and he would want you to be happy. Calling Yates Papa does not mean you forget Thomas. It just means you are letting Yates be part of our family. And I think that would make everyone happy, including your real papa if he could see us now." Daniel nodded slowly, processing this. "Okay, then I want to call him Papa." That night when Yates came in from evening chores, Daniel walked right up to him and said, "Papa, can you help me with my reading?" Clara saw the expression that crossed Yates's face, the shock and joy and something that might have been tears in his eyes. He knelt down and pulled Daniel into a hug. "I would love to help you with your reading, son." Clara turned away to give them privacy, but she was smiling through her own tears. Winter came to Nevada in early November, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The ranch work slowed slightly, but there was still plenty to do. Clara continued cooking and keeping house, but now Yates was there to help with the heavy work. He chopped wood, hauled water, and did repairs around the house that she had never had time or skill to manage. They talked in the evenings about their plans for the future. Yates took her out to see the land he wanted to buy, a beautiful stretch of valley about 10 miles from the Triple Bar with a spring-fed creek and good grass. They paced off where the house would go, where the barn would stand, where they would plant a garden. "We could move there next summer," Yates said. "I will need to stay on at the Triple Bar through spring roundup, but after that, we could start building. It will be hard work and we will be living rough for a while. I do not mind hard work. And the children will love having space to run and play." "Our children," Yates corrected gently. "They are ours now." Clara leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth. "Yes, ours." That Christmas was the happiest Clara had known in years. There was not much money for gifts, but Yates carved each child a new toy, and Clara sewed them each new clothes from fabric Louisa gave her. On Christmas morning, the little house was filled with laughter and the smell of cinnamon and pine. Henry and Louisa invited them to the main house for Christmas dinner, and it was a boisterous affair with food and stories, and even some music when Henry pulled out an old fiddle and played carols. Clara looked around the table at her children's happy faces, at Yates beside her with Emma on his lap, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had come to Nevada with 3 children, no husband, no money, and no hope. She had been prepared to do whatever it took to survive. Instead, she had found love, family, and a future that looked brighter than she had ever imagined possible. As winter deepened, Clara began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure, but by February there was no doubt. One evening after the children were asleep, she told Yates. He stared at her for a long moment, then broke into the widest smile she had ever seen on his face. "Really, we are having a baby." "Yes. Sometime in late summer, I think." Yates pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby, our baby, Clara." His voice broke and he just held her, his face pressed into her hair. When he finally pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks. "I never thought I would have this. A family, children of my own. After my mother died and we all got split up, I figured I was too damaged for this kind of life. And now I have you and Daniel and Emma and Michael, and soon there will be another one. It is more than I deserve." "You deserve all of it. You are the best man I know, Yates. Our children are lucky to have you as their father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. Clara continued her work as long as she could, though Yates fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from lifting anything heavy or working too hard. Louisa rolled her eyes at his hovering, but Clara found it endearing. In April, Yates gave his notice at the Triple Bar. He would stay through the spring roundup as promised, but then they would be moving to their own land. Henry agreed to sell him the lumber for their house at cost, and several of the hands volunteered to help with the building in exchange for future help when they needed it. By May, the foundation was laid and the frame was going up. It was a simple 4-room house, but it felt enormous compared to the 2-room cabin. There would be a real kitchen, a front room, and 2 bedrooms, one for them and one for the children. "We will need to add on eventually," Yates said, looking at the frame with satisfaction. "Once the children get older and need more space, and if we keep having babies, we will definitely need more room." "How many babies were you planning on?" Clara asked, amused. "As many as you are willing to give me. I missed out on the first years with Daniel and Emma and Michael. I want to savor every moment with the ones that are ours from the beginning." "They are all ours, Yates. All 4 of them belong to both of us." "I know, but you know what I mean." Clara did know. She had seen how he looked at her growing belly, the wonder and pride in his eyes. This baby would be the first one that was truly his from the moment of conception, and she understood why that mattered to him. The house was finished in June, and they moved in with much excitement and chaos. The children loved having real rooms to sleep in, and Clara loved having a proper kitchen with good light and a big work table. Yates built furniture in his spare time, rough but functional pieces that filled the empty rooms. They started their own small herd with 5 cows, and a bull purchased with their combined savings. Yates built a barn and a chicken coop, and Daniel proudly took on the job of collecting eggs every morning. Emma helped Clara plant a garden, carefully watering the seeds and watching eagerly for the first green shoots to appear. It was hard work, building a ranch from nothing, but they were doing it together. Every fence post driven, every board nailed, every seed planted was an investment in their future. And through it all, Clara's belly grew rounder and Yates's smile grew wider. In late August, on a blazing hot afternoon, Clara went into labor. Yates rode like fury to fetch Louisa, who had delivered dozens of babies in her lifetime, and then paced outside the bedroom door while Clara labored inside. It was a long, hard birth, and there were moments when Clara was sure she could not take any more. But Louisa was calm and confident, and finally, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the air. "It is a boy," Louisa announced. "A big, healthy boy." Yates burst through the door and rushed to Clara's side. She was exhausted and sweaty, but she had never seen anything more beautiful than the look on his face when Louisa placed the baby in his arms. "A son," he whispered, looking down at the red-faced, squalling infant. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Yates looked at the baby for a long moment, then said, "Joseph, after my father. If that is all right with you. Joseph is perfect." The older children crowded into the room to meet their new brother, and Clara's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. 7-year-old Daniel, now a big brother instead of the baby. 6-year-old Emma, thrilled to have another baby to help care for. And Michael, now 2 years old, and just beginning to understand that this crying bundle was a permanent addition to the family. And Yates, her husband, holding Joseph with such tender care that Clara fell in love with him all over again. The next year passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Their little ranch prospered slowly but steadily. The cattle bred and gave them calves to sell. The garden produced enough vegetables to feed the family and preserve for winter. Yates did occasional work for neighboring ranches to bring in extra cash, and Clara sold butter and eggs in Rawhide. It was not an easy life. There were droughts and sickness, predators that took chickens and calves, equipment that broke at the worst possible time. But they faced every challenge together, and somehow that made even the hard times bearable. Daniel grew tall and capable, learning everything Yates could teach him about ranching and horses. Emma became Clara's right hand in the kitchen and garden, cheerful and helpful. Michael was a wild child, always covered in dust and full of mischief. And Joseph grew from a squalling infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone. One evening in the spring, almost 2 years after they had moved to the ranch, Clara was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Yates came to sit beside her. Joseph was asleep in her arms, and the other children were playing in the yard. "You remember the day we met?" Yates asked. "Of course. You rode up on Copper, and I was so scared you were going to tell us to leave. I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever seen. Standing there with 3 babies and nothing to your name, but your chin was up and your eyes were fierce. You were ready to fight the whole world if you had to. I was terrified. I had no idea what I was going to do. But you would have figured it out. You would have survived somehow because that is who you are." He took her free hand and laced their fingers together. "I am so glad I got to you first, though, that I got to be the one to help you, that I got to be the one to love you." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never believed in fate or destiny. But sometimes I wonder if maybe we were supposed to find each other. If Thomas had not died, if I had not come to Nevada, if you had not ridden past that cabin that exact morning, none of this would have happened. Then I am grateful for every twist of fate that led us here, even the sad ones, even the hard ones, because they brought me you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Daniel teach Michael how to throw a rope while Emma made flower crowns in the grass. Joseph stirred in Clara's arms but did not wake. The sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, and somewhere in the distance, cattle were lowing. "I want another baby," Yates said suddenly. Clara laughed. "We have 4 children, Yates. 4, and this ranch keeps us busy from dawn to dark." "Are you sure you want to add another?" "I am sure. I love our big, chaotic family. I love the noise and the mess and the constant motion. I grew up in silence after my family fell apart, and I never want to be that alone again." "Well, You do not have to worry about that. Between the children and the animals, this place is never quiet. So is that a yes? To another baby, Clara looked at him, at the hope and love in his gray-blue eyes, and felt her heart overflow. Yes, let us have another baby. Yates kissed her, soft and sweet, and Joseph made a sleepy noise of protest at being squished between them. They both laughed, and Clara thought about how far she had come from that desperate woman stepping off the stagecoach in Rawhide. She had arrived with 3 children and no husband, no money, and no hope. And Yates had looked at them and said, in effect, "I will take all 4. He had given her everything: a home, a family, love, security, and a future filled with promise. She had saved herself through sheer determination and hard work, but Yates had given her the chance to do it. And in return, she had given him the family he had always dreamed of. It was not perfect. There were still hard days, still struggles and setbacks. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. 2 years later, Clara gave birth to twin girls, and Yates was so proud he rode to every neighboring ranch to announce it. 3 years after that came another boy. By the time Clara was 35, they had 7 children, a prospering ranch, and a life they had built together from nothing. Daniel grew into a fine young man who stayed on the ranch to work beside his father, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Emma married a kind young farmer and settled just 10 miles away, close enough to visit often. Michael became a horse trader, traveling throughout Nevada but always coming home between trips. Joseph and his younger siblings grew up knowing nothing but love and security. The hardships their mother and father had endured, just stories told by the fire on winter evenings. Yates and Clara grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work. But they never stopped looking at each other with love, never stopped being grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house had been added onto several times and now sprawled across the yard, full of life and noise and laughter. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Yates and Clara walked up the hill behind the house to watch the stars come out. Yates moved slower now, his joints stiff from decades of hard work, but his hand in hers was as warm and steady as ever. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here, building this life? You could have gone back east, found an easier path." Clara looked at him in surprise. "Regret this?" "Regret you? Never, not for a single moment. We worked so hard. Sometimes I wonder if I should have given you an easier life." "Yates Grayson, you gave me the best life. You gave me love and partnership and a family. You took me and my 3 children when we had nothing, and you made us yours. You gave us everything that matters. You gave me just as much, more maybe. You gave me a reason to build something, to put down roots. You gave me children to raise and love. You gave me a home." They stood together on the hill, looking down at the ranch they had built. Lights glowed in the windows of the big house where their grandchildren were sleeping. The barn stood solid and strong. Cattle grazed in the pastures and horses moved like shadows in the corrals. 30 years of work, love, and perseverance all spread out below them. "I love you," Clara said. "I have loved you since that first autumn when you sat on my porch and told me I did not have to carry everything alone. I love you too. I have loved you since the moment I saw you outside that falling down cabin, brave and fierce and refusing to give up. I will love you until the day I die, and beyond that, if there is anything beyond." They stood together under the stars, 2 people who had found each other when they both needed saving, who had built a life of love from the ashes of loss and hardship. The West had been hard on them, as it was hard on everyone, but they had survived and thrived because they had each other. Clara had arrived in Nevada with 3 children and no husband, nearly penniless and desperate. Yates had looked at them and said, "I will take all 4." And in doing so, he had saved them all, including himself. It was a love story written in dust and sweat, in hard work and harder times overcome. But it was also a love story written in laughter and joy, in children raised and grandchildren born, in 30 years of partnership and devotion. And standing on that hill under the vast Nevada sky, Clara knew without a doubt that she would do it all again. Every hard moment, every struggle, every tear and triumph. Because all of it had led her here to this moment with this man, surrounded by the life they had built together. That was what love was in the end. Not just the romance and passion, though they had shared plenty of both, but the choosing, every single day, to stand together, to work together, to build something that would last beyond their own lives. Clara and Yates Grayson had built that kind of love. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the desert wind whispered through the sage, they stood together and watched their legacy sleeping peacefully in the house below, surrounded by love that would echo through generations. They had taken each other, all in, completely. And that had made all the difference.